Let's talk about something that so many of us have lived through. Staying nice in relationships that leave us emotionally exhausted, mentally scrambled, and spiritually depleted. We've been taught, especially women, that being nice is a virtue. That if we can just be understanding enough, accommodating enough, forgiving enough, the other person will eventually change, soften, see us. But when you're dealing with someone who makes everything about them, who uses your empathy as a weapon, who gaslights your reality, being nice doesn't save the relationship. It erases you. So here's the hard truth, friends. Stop being nice to a narcissist. Start being boundaried. Start being brave. I'm not here to demonize anyone. I'm here to say that compassion without boundaries isn't compassion. It's self-betrayal. And self-betrayal is not a prerequisite for love. It's a fast track to burnout. Here's what we do instead. We trade niceness for clarity. We choose truth over peace-faking. We learn that our worth is not dependent on someone else's validation, especially someone who is incapable of offering it unless it serves them. Setting a boundary doesn't make you mean. It makes you responsible for your life. Refusing to enable manipulation isn't cold. It's courageous. You are not here to be liked by someone who profits off your silence. You are here to be whole. You are here to be seen by yourself first. We grow up being told to be nice. It's one of the first behavioral expectations placed on us as children, especially for girls. Be nice to your classmates. Be nice to your brother. Be nice to strangers. But here's what no one really explained to us. Niceness, as it's often taught, isn't about authenticity or connection. It's about compliance. It's about shrinking, smoothing, and self-editing in the hope of being accepted, or at least not rejected. Kindness, on the other hand, is a completely different story. Kindness is rooted in truth. It's an offering of empathy and presence that still honors the self. You can be kind and still be direct. You can be kind and still say no. You can be kind and still walk away from a relationship that hurts. And that distinction between niceness and kindness is everything when you're dealing with someone who manipulates, dominates, or disregards your feelings. Niceness says, I'll keep the peace even if it costs me my voice. Kindness says, I care about peace, but not at the expense of my integrity. Niceness sacrifices authenticity for harmony. Kindness brings authenticity into the relationship and invites others to meet us there. That's why narcissistic individuals often love nice people, because niceness can be exploited. It's predictable. It avoids confrontation, which creates a perfect environment for manipulation to grow unchecked. And when we're nice in the face of emotional harm, when we smile instead of speak up, when we say it's okay instead of that hurt, when we rationalize instead of recognize, we don't just protect the other person's comfort, we betray ourselves. Niceness often becomes a survival strategy, a way to manage anxiety, avoid abandonment, or delay conflict. But it rarely brings us the connection or safety we're longing for. In fact, it usually brings the opposite: disconnection from ourselves. Kindness demands more courage. It requires a deeper relationship with truth. Kindness says, I see your humanity, but I also see mine, and I won't disappear just to keep this relationship afloat. That's hard, especially when the person on the other end is used to you being endlessly accommodating, agreeable, and self-sacrificing. But kindness without self-respect isn't kindness, it's performance. Here's the kicker. People who manipulate others often prefer niceness over kindness because niceness doesn't challenge them. It doesn't hold a mirror. It doesn't say, hey, that behavior crossed a line. Niceness allows the narcissist to stay comfortably in control, while the nice person slowly withers under the weight of unspoken pain. But kindness, real kindness, is disruptive. It names what's happening. It says, no more. It creates space for growth or for walking away, whichever is more honest. Sometimes we mistake our discomfort with conflict for a moral stance. I don't want to hurt them, we say. I just want to be nice. But being nice to someone who continually harms you isn't moral. It's martyrdom. It's martyrdom. And it reinforces the cycle. Every time we show up with niceness instead of boundaries, we reinforce their belief that they don't have to change, that there will be no consequences, that our silence means permission. And the truth is, the longer we confuse niceness with goodness, the longer we stay trapped. Niceness will ask you to tolerate what your spirit knows is intolerable. Kindness will ask you to listen to yourself, to speak honestly, and to hold firm even when it's uncomfortable. And in the end, that's the version of love that heals, not the one that appeases. Empathy is one of the most powerful connectors we have as human beings. It allows us to step into another person's experience, to say, I see you, I hear you, you're not alone. But empathy without boundaries isn't compassion, it's emotional leakage. It's pouring yourself into someone else without a container to hold your own integrity, your own needs, your own truth. And when we do that long enough, we start to disappear in the name of love. This gets especially dangerous when we're dealing with someone who expects empathy but offers none in return. Someone who uses our caring nature to avoid responsibility, to deflect blame, or to make themselves the center of every crisis. Without boundaries, our empathy becomes a funnel that fuels their dysfunction and depletes our soul. We start to believe we're being loving by absorbing their pain, fixing their chaos, or excusing their behavior. But what we're actually doing is betraying ourselves. Self-betrayal often masquerades as empathy. It's what happens when we say, they're going through a lot, and then stay silent while they cross our boundaries again. It's when we tell ourselves, they didn't mean it, instead of listening to the pit in our stomach. It's when we confuse enabling with support, and we call it love when really, it's fear dressed in compassion's clothing. When we don't have boundaries around our empathy, we become emotional sponges, soaking up other people's drama, disappointment, and dysfunction until we're too soaked through to move. And we think we're being strong. We think we're being good. But strength without self-awareness is just self-sacrifice. And goodness without limits is just codependency with better PR. Boundaries are what give empathy its power. They say, I can care about your pain, but I will not let it become my prison. They say, I will walk with you, but I won't walk for you. I won't carry what you refuse to hold. That might sound cold to someone who's used to your unfiltered empathy, but it's not cruelty, it's clarity. It's emotional adulthood. It's choosing to be responsible to people, not for them. When someone is self-absorbed or manipulative, they often depend on your lack of boundaries to maintain control. Your empathy becomes their tool, not because you're weak, but because you're wide open. And openness without discernment is dangerous. You need boundaries not because you don't care, but because you care deeply. And you can't afford to keep bleeding for people who cut you. This doesn't mean we stop being empathetic. It means we become wiser with our empathy. We learn to ask, is this connection mutual? Is this person also showing up for me? Am I listening to their pain at the cost of silencing my own? These questions aren't unkind, they're essential. Because empathy should never require you to abandon yourself. The bottom line is this: empathy is a bridge, not a leash. It should lead to understanding, not enslavement. And when you set clear, loving boundaries around your empathy, you're not shutting people out. You're keeping yourself whole. You're saying, I matter too. And that, my friend, is where real compassion begins. There's a painful moment in every toxic dynamic, often after months or years of walking on eggshells, when you realize this isn't about love anymore. It's about proving your worth to someone who has no intention of seeing it. You find yourself performing instead of connecting, over-explaining instead of being heard, apologizing just to keep the peace. And you keep trying, not because they've earned your effort, but because you're convinced that if you can just be better, nicer, more understanding, they'll finally treat you with the care you've been longing for. But here's the hard truth. When someone uses your empathy as leverage to avoid accountability, to rewrite reality, or to keep you locked in a cycle of guilt, that's not love. That's emotional manipulation. And you can't heal a relationship by continuing to betray yourself inside it. People who weaponize empathy are often incredibly skilled at reading your heart. They know how much you value connection. They know how deeply you care, and they use that against you. They spin a story that makes them the victim and you the villain, even when you're the one left hurting. They'll say you're a too sensitive when you set a boundary, a too dramatic when you express a need, a too selfish when you finally say no. So you stay, you keep giving, you keep hoping. Because you believe, and this belief often runs deep, that if you could just love them better, they'd stop hurting you. That if you could just explain it right, they'd finally understand. But the goalposts always move. The target always shifts. And your sense of self starts eroding under the weight of endless emotional negotiation. The most dangerous thing about trying to win over someone like this is that it rewires your sense of what love is. You start to think love is something you earn by enduring mistreatment. That love is about persistence, not reciprocity. That love means staying silent to avoid conflict or tolerating disrespect to protect the relationship. But that's not love. That's survival. And let's name this too. There's grief here, deep grief, because you're not just walking away from a person. You're walking away from a fantasy, the version of them you hoped would finally show up. And when they weaponize your empathy, they keep that fantasy alive just enough to keep you hooked. A few crumbs of kindness, a moment of vulnerability, a fleeting apology, and then the cycle begins again. But healing begins the moment you stop fighting for someone who keeps turning your heart into a battlefield. The moment you realize, I don't need to earn basic decency. I don't need to beg for emotional safety. I don't have to perform pain to be seen. That moment, that's the beginning of freedom. Because love that's real, love that's grounded in respect, mutuality, and safety, will never require you to shrink or chase. So if you find yourself trying to win over someone who keeps using your empathy against you, I want you to know you don't have to keep proving your worth. You're allowed to leave the game entirely, and you're allowed to walk towards something better, not because they finally changed, but because you finally did. One of the hardest and most liberating lessons we can learn is this: you are not responsible for how someone else feels. You are not the keeper of their mood, their reactions, their wounds, or their self-esteem. And when you've been in a relationship with someone who's emotionally manipulative or narcissistic, this truth can feel both foreign and terrifying because you've been trained over time to carry their emotional weight as if it were your own. This pattern usually starts subtly. Maybe you get blamed when they're upset, even if you didn't cause it. Maybe you find yourself walking on eggshells to avoid triggering their insecurity. Maybe they say things like, "You made me feel this way," or "If you cared about me, you wouldn't," and you start believing it, that their feelings are a direct result of your actions, and it's your job to manage, soothe, or prevent them. But here's the truth. Everyone is responsible for their own emotions, not their triggers. Those are often automatic and unconscious, but their response to those triggers. A healthy person says, "I'm feeling hurt. I need a minute." An emotionally manipulative person says, "Look what you did to me," and expects you to fix it. That's not emotional maturity. That's outsourcing responsibility. And when you're constantly managing someone else's emotions, you stop tending to your own. You go into hypervigilance, trying to predict and prevent every possible upset. You lose track of your own needs, your own values, even your own personality. You become a caretaker instead of a partner, a peacekeeper instead of a person, and slowly you disappear. This emotional caretaking is especially tricky because it can feel like love. It looks like attentiveness. It looks like sacrifice. But if you're constantly adjusting yourself to make someone else more comfortable, at the expense of your truth, your needs, your safety, that's not love. That's codependency. And it's not sustainable. You are not selfish for refusing to carry someone else's emotional baggage. You are not cruel for saying, "I won't be blamed for your feelings." You are not cold for stepping back when their ego becomes a black hole. Boundaries aren't walls to keep people out. They're guidelines for what you will and will not allow in your emotional space, and they are essential to any relationship that hopes to be healthy. Let me be clear. Taking responsibility for your own behavior is very different from taking responsibility for someone else's emotions. If you say something hurtful, you own it. You apologize. You repair. That's accountability. But if someone is consistently blaming you for how they feel, and especially if they refuse to do their own work, that's manipulation. Your job is not to cushion their ego every time it feels bruised. Real love, real connection, isn't about walking on a tightrope to keep someone emotionally regulated. It's about standing on solid ground, yours and theirs. And if someone can't hold their own emotional weight, it doesn't mean you have to pick it up. It might mean you need to let go.